Sego, if you like what we're doing here, if you support the show and you want to give support to the show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Let's Talk Native. And if you do so, we'll provide you some exclusive content and some things that others aren't going to get when you get it. So support us by going to Patreon. Yahweh.
Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
Sego, I'm John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. Hey, since 2017, May 5th has been designated Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Day. And this year is no exception, but this year they've actually turned it into a full week of National Week of Action regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. There are any number of events happening all week long, probably culminating in a lot of activity on the weekend. In fact, even Cambridge, New York, the school that the town where the school that I'm battling over the mascot issue, they're actually doing a really nice event out there. They've got a walk that's going on, walk/run, and it's a fundraiser and primarily an event to raise awareness to what Native women have experienced in the United States and Canada. That's what I'm going to talk about on the show today. I want to talk about the day, using May 5th as the day to raise awareness, to host events, to have conferences. And I encourage you, if you just go online and look up Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, or MMIW, you'll find there are several national organizations that are doing some things. You can find valid groups that you can donate to that are raising awareness. There are some that are specific to states. In fact, I just reached out to a person down in Texas, MMIW Texas is. There's been an effort down there to raise awareness. So there are a lot of issues that are related to this historically, and of course, I've talked a lot about residential schools, but if you go back to the origins of colonization, and in fact, even before colonization, what they considered the discovery era, what is clear is that Native women in particular became really victimized. There was actually a rape culture that came. I mean, you can find it detailed even in Columbus's journal and some of the other folks who were along with him about the violence that they were perpetrating against women. So beyond using women and men for slaves, there was women in particular. Columbus boasted about how much money he could get for girls as young as 9 and 10 by taking them back to Spain to be essentially sex slaves. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, had children with his slaves, and what's oftentimes missed in the conversation about chattel slavery is how much women were used, not just Native men, but women were used in that industry. So I think it's really important that people understand the origins that bring us to the problem that we're now confronting with missing and murdered Indigenous women, and it's vast and it's pervasive. It's much of this attention came from originally from on the Canadian side. That's where most of the attention was brought to missing and murdered Indigenous women, because even on the Canadian side, there was even more remoteness. There's actually one highway that they call the Highway of Tears, because it it was just known for women being kidnapped and taken, across Alberta and some of the areas of Western Canada. But the remoteness of our territories, and again, our territories are remote by design. We're pushed off to parcels of land that, frankly, the United States or Canada thought was worthless, and though the remoteness of our communities actually made our women actually even more vulnerable than the men. And not that our people weren't vulnerable because of the remoteness anyway, especially as it came to trying to eke out some sort of subsistence living. But the women in particular would be vulnerable because the extractive industries and some of the other industries that would cause men to leave their families and go into some of these more wilderness areas, they would, once they were away from their families, it was like a whole nother world opened up to them. One where they didn't have to abide by the rules to the extent that they had rules of civil society. Those rules disappeared once they were, quote unquote, in Indian country. So this development of man camps that went along with many of the extractive industries, and not just extraction from the ground, whether we're talking about timber, logging, there was such a prevalence of men who were working in these really male-dominated industries away from their families, if they had families, where the closest female companionship they could grab was from native territories. And it wasn't look, it wasn't just companionship. It was driven in that same kind of rape culture. But I think it's important that people realize just how vulnerable women had become because of the way industries pushed themselves into native territories. And oftentimes these industries were very, very unregulated, both in terms of what they were actually doing with the industry, but their behavior in an area. And of course, there were also not going to be any law enforcement resources. One of the biggest problems that we have was the pattern of apathy that came from police, whether it was local police, if there even was a local police force, or whether it was state police, or whether it was federal law enforcement like the FBI. Many women, nobody would believe a story of a woman who would turn up missing. They would always assume automatically, oh, that's just a runaway. And then when missing women's body would show up, there would also be an apathy amongst the coroners and those who would be investigating the death and say, well, it looks like an accident. So cause of death would oftentimes be listed as accidental. And so this is really what has been the experience. I mean, oftentimes the other thing would be the race would also oftentimes be listed as just others, as an other race. So gathering the data associated with missing and murdered Indigenous women became increasingly difficult. And it wasn't just the apathy from the police that would contribute to some of this problem. Sometimes it would be the participation of police. Look, in most of the most violent circumstances that people, oppressed people have experienced, the law enforcement has oftentimes been complicit. And we've got case after case after case on both the U.S. and Canadian side where the police themselves were part of the perps involved in kidnappings or the murder of Indigenous women. And I'm not going to say out of hand that police are solely responsible, but there've been too many instances where the police had participated in this. So this is kind of where we're at. And let me just give you some basic numbers. Native women are 10 times more likely to be killed than the national average. And this is the United States. So if you figure out the likelihood of being murdered, or killed via manslaughter or whatever, to be the victim of a homicide, Native women are 10 times more likely than anybody else in the United States. I mean, think about that, 10 times more likely. The half of all Native women will have experienced some form of violence, domestic violence or violence in their lives. And And I think it was, as from what I recall, it was as high as 40% of all women will experience some form of sexual violence. So, I mean, we live in an era where now there's been a lot more attention given to like Me Too and some of the sexual violence against women, but Native women still aren't getting the attention. So the reason for having these national days of recognition of something like missing and murdered Indigenous women is to call attention to it. And in this week in particular, trying to do a full week of raising awareness, of conferences, of Zoom calls. Again, my old hometown where I graduated from high school, they're doing a walk and a run. And look, and this is a community that has essentially, for all intents and purposes, no native women in the community. So they're doing this out of a heightened awareness because it's being sponsored by Cambridge for Social Justice. It's a group that I'm working with on the mascot issue. But just as I've tried to account as I engage people over whether it's a mascot issue or whether it's an environmental issue or whatever, when you're involved in social justice, it just doesn't stop with one issue. And we oftentimes have to make clear that when we're talking about environmental justice, there's a reason that environmental justice impacts things like missing and murdered Indigenous women, like the man camp situation that I just talked about. The mascot issue. If you can objectify Native people in general, you can further objectify Native women, and we've seen that. We've seen that with everything from Hollywood's portrayal of Native women, oftentimes not even played by Native women, but Hollywood's portrayal of Native women. The Disney, the animation that does all of these films where they try to represent a Native person, they always over sexualize Native women in particular. They always have Native men looking like buffoons or thugs, but they're always going to have the little Native princess look over sexualized. Well, and that all contributes to it. So, I mean, I know. It's crazy because when you get involved in something like a fight over the mascot issue, you'll oftentimes get the other side, to try to offer some sort of olive branch. But the idea that any group of people that want to encourage the use of Native mascots, for them to even try to weigh in, and this is what we're seeing in Cambridge. We have this whole group of, I call them the Proud Boys, not to take it away from the other Proud Boys, but the ones who want to say protect the pride. They tried to actually co-opt some of this work being done by Cambridge for Social Justice on the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue. They pledged to raise money for it. You don't get it. All of the national organization behind missing and murdered Indigenous women, we are many of the same people who oppose the use of Native mascots. So you can't somehow clean yourself up or redefine yourself as concerned about Native people on missing and murdered Indigenous women issues when you're out there promoting the objectification of Native people through mascots. You can't parallel those two things. So, shame on you for even trying and for taking away from the good work that the group in Cambridge. And look, and I don't mean to just highlight what's happening in my old hometown. There are places all over. You can find some local effort being done wherever you live. Just search, again, missing and murdered Indigenous women online. You can actually go to niwrc.org. You can find some. That's one of the national organizations. But there are several national organizations. There are several regional organizations that are addressing this, and I encourage you to do so. It is really, really important. Look, I remember a few years back when the first time I had seen a video that was done by the 1492s that was addressing violence against women. And one of the lines in the video, and this was done, the poem essentially that is that the whole film the video is based on, was written by Ryan Redcord, and one of it is a plea. It's a plea to us men. It says, you're supposed to be warriors. You're supposed to protect us. Well, look, there are no more resilient people on the planet than Native women. But regardless of the resiliency, they should not have to face the violence that men, including Native men. Look, by some of the estimates and some of the calculations and some of the reporting, 70% of violence against Native women is from non-Native people. But that still leaves 30% coming from Native people, Native men. So, look, we have to call upon our own relatives to do more to protect Native women. Our relatives, our families. And look, I realize that we're struggling with a lot of intergenerational trauma. Both our men and our women are battling with substance abuse, and that makes it that much more difficult. And the reason that we're battling with substance abuse is because of the mental health issues that many of our people are dealing with. But I've said this before, you can track much of the ills that exist, not only for Native people living on territory, but even the ills that our people face when we're living in urban environments, to the poverty that has been generationally imposed upon Native people. With the limited amount of opportunities that Native people have, and Native women even more so, it makes it that much more difficult for any of us to seek out and have a fulfilling life. And if you diminish somebody's quality of life to the whole point where they start questioning the value of their own lives, not only do you create problems associated with suicide and substance abuse, but it makes our women that much more vulnerable as they pursue whatever opportunities they can pursue to look to make a living, to eke out a career. I'm not going to just condemn what some would attribute to risky behavior. Look, it's really easy to automatically assume when somebody turns up missing that they ran away, and that might be the case on some occasions. But to make that assumption and to dismiss the concern that a family has for a loved one by just dismissing out of hand as a runaway, it's wrong. It is just categorically wrong. Look, there's a system in the United States they call the Amber Alert system for when a child turns up missing. 90% of the Amber Alerts are for white kids. And look, I understand, white children, white girls, white boys, they're victims of wrongdoing at the same, all the same. They clearly experience some of the same hazards that people of color experience. But when you think about how often you will see a black child or a Native child listed on an Amber Alert, I'm glad that within our communities, we have our own networks, because without them, we would never know when somebody has turned up missing. So during this week, on this day, and throughout the rest of the week, I ask you, as you listen to this program, to learn more. Learn all you can about missing and murdered Indigenous women, because it isn't just about this week. This is a day and a week to call attention to it. But I ask you to go online and to learn more and learn what you can do in a given area. There are obviously donations that can be made to various organizations, and I'm not going to pitch for one in particular, but look for them online. Find out and be aware that there are families that are in need. It's not just organizations. There are families that are in need. We need to raise awareness. And if you live on a Native territory, make sure that your local government, your Native government, is doing all that it can do, that it has programs, that it's providing care or halfway house or safe houses for women. A lot of this, a lot of the violence against women is domestic violence. And it's not just about a bad marriage gone bad or a relationship gone bad. Sometimes it's family tensions. It could be abusive parents and that kind of stuff. The fact that we have to add girls to that line, so it's not just missing and murdered Indigenous women, it's missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And frankly, we've added Two-Spirit, and we've added boys, we've added children, because this is what the vulnerability of our young people it only continues to grow. And part of that vulnerability comes out of, frankly, technology isn't making it any better. There's, the people that are getting lured into meetings, into relationships that are, just cyber relationships. So there's a lot of wrongdoing that can happen, and technology is contributing to it. Rather than technology helping us in these situations, oftentimes it's contributing to the problem. I mean, in fact, I've asked before and I'll ask it again. I'm asking for somebody to develop an app for a phone that will localize and regionalize when somebody's missing. I don't need to know if somebody's missing in North Dakota if I'm living on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. But I do need to know if somebody's missing in the immediate area. And perhaps as time goes on, we add concentric circles around an area. So eventually, yes, I should know if somebody's been missing from North Dakota for 2 weeks. I don't really need to know in 2 days necessarily. But so using technology, the same technology that's using to make some of our people more vulnerable, we should look for technology to come in to help us. We live in a world where communication is something that's at our fingertips, but we don't communicate that effectively. So this is the time now. You've got smartphones, you've got laptops, you've got personal computers, you've got all the things at your disposal to make sure that you're connected. And to make sure that you can reach out to others who are experiencing a loss or who's looking for a missing loved one. So I ask that you do that. I ask that you take some time out of your day. Look, I know there's a lot of crap on the internet, but there's some ways this technology can be turned around to help us. So I ask that you do that. At very least, use it to raise awareness. Use it so you become more aware, and then share what you've learned. Let more and more people understand the vulnerability frankly, of all women. But however you look at racism or misogyny or any other kind of bigotry, anytime you take a people who are marginalized in some fashion, whether they are women or whether they are LGBTQ2S, and add on top of that, a racial component, now you've increased the likelihood or the vulnerability of those people. So I think it's really important that we understand that we have to care about everybody. I mean, as human beings. I mean, when we talk about the word unwe, and we say that means a real or original human being, a real human being. It means that we are connected to the land. That means that we are not just connected to the land, but we're connected to all that are on that land. So I think it's really important that we understand that if you know somebody who's vulnerable because they're Native, if you add any other characterization that of a person who could experience bigotry, it gets magnified. It gets enhanced. So during this day and this week, I think it's really important to raise awareness. Yes, we're talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women, but we're also talking about missing and murdered LGBTQ2S people as well. We are talking about all the people who are the most vulnerable people in this, to what has increasingly almost seems to be a system of patriarchy, misogyny, and male dominance. You would think that this many years into the push for civil rights and human rights and social justice, that we would still not be in this place. But here we are. Here we are. So again, do your own research. I'm doing this show, to call you out as the listeners of this program. I'm doing the show to call you out as listeners to don't take my word for it. Don't take my word for any of the statistics that I might have rattled off, or do your own research and please find out what you can do in your area or at the national level to support the fight to raise awareness and to end the missing and murdered Indigenous women issues that we face. And this is on either side of the imaginary line. I had a conversation after they did a bit of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the Canadian side over missing and murdered Indigenous women. And among the statements that was issued was that the problem in Canada represented genocide. And I had to think about that. And when I asked some of the folks who were involved in making that determination, they said, you have to understand that genocide isn't about eliminating a people completely. It could be all or part. And when you consider the high level of missing women and murdered women, it does. It meets the definition. It meets the definition of genocide. So while I don't want to throw that word around all the time so it becomes meaningless, you have to understand that what women are experiencing, and what Native women in particular are experiencing, affects us all. Our whole population is impacted by what happens to the women of our community, to the girls of our community. And look, whether our girls turn up missing by their own hand or by the hand of another, it's still a tragedy. So we need to do all that we can to counsel our children, to counsel our loved ones, our sisters, our cousins, our nieces. We need to make sure that they understand that they are loved and that we care, and that we can offer them some prospect for hope in the future. Because the lack of hope is the most damaging aspect of Native life, because there isn't enough emphasis on creating a good prospect for the future for our children and for Native women in particular. So I want to thank you for listening to the program. And again, I'm going to say it one more time. I encourage you to go online and do as much research as you can. Participate in some of the Facebook group pages, the Twitter threads, whatever. Instagram. I'm not a big one on Instagram, but I'm sure there has to be a strong Instagram presence with photos and with links and that kind of stuff, information associated with missing and murdered Indigenous women. Use whatever platform you use, whatever you're comfortable with. But please do learn more and speak out more about missing and murdered Indigenous women. I want to thank you for listening to the program. I'm John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.